How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Thank you for joining me today on Friday, April 6th. I have another round of topics around the NFL that I wanted to get into and discuss today, starting with Caleb Williams and having his official top 30 visit with the Chicago Bears back on Wednesday. It all went pretty smoothly, and I want to get into more of the details around that and how it was a little bit different from other official top 30 visits. Later on, we're going to cover the Chiefs' failed vote in Kansas City around renovations to Arrowhead and what that could mean for them potentially moving in the future. It's not out of the question. A lot of questions around that. Then later on, I'm going to talk about Russell Wilson and what his teammates are saying about him now, his new Steelers teammates, as well as covering more around Stefon Diggs and his new restructured contract with the Houston Texans. All of that coming up on today's episode. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the Caleb Williams topic, I want to remind you guys, as I always do, if you have any questions or comments during the live show, please use the tip and donations link on your screen or running across the ticker below with any of those. Using the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, ensures that I can see your question, read it on air. It pops up in my chat box, and then maybe carry the conversation elsewhere or just have it be more engaging. It's a lot more fun for me that way, and it's a big help for the show as well as all the other shows on the network. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. We always appreciate it a lot whenever you guys are able to do that. And saying that, I can go into that first topic around Caleb Williams, the presumed first overall pick in this year's draft. The draft is now less than 3 weeks away. It's 3 weeks away exactly from yesterday. And last time I think I was on here talking about Caleb Williams, it was after his pro day. And since then, nothing's really happened too much with him and visits because he had his first and potentially only visit this past Wednesday. Ian Rappaport, NFL Insider, reported that Williams took his visit, went to Hollis Hall in Chicago, visited with the Bears, and did everything that is entitled in a pro visit. Toured around the facility, talked more with Matt Eberflus, Ryan Poles, got to know around the locker room and stuff like that. I'm sure they had other more in-depth talks, but that's all that goes into a pro meeting or a top visit. And in saying that, Ian Rappaport later reported that this is most likely the only visit Caleb Williams will take on this period before the NFL draft. Just like I said before, this just seems too obvious not to happen at this point. We've seen, or I've talked about, Caleb Williams having prior meetings before his pro day only with the Chicago Bears, then afterwards talking to them as well. Met with them before and I'm pretty sure after the NFL Combine. Even though he didn't test or do any of the drills, he talked in multiple times with the Chicago Bears already. And if that wasn't already enough reason to think he was going there, during this meeting, Mark Silverman, who covers the Bears on ESPN 1000, on his show, he said, "I will not tell you where it was," which was the dinner he's referring to, "but I will tell you not only did Caleb Williams have a Bears meal, not only was Caleb Williams with front office members, but they had him dine with current members of the Chicago Bears. They had him not sit with the Bears executives, who were there, by the way, but he sat and ate with current players on the current Bears roster." And already stuff has been mentioned around the Bears. If you remember or if you noticed in the news or just swirling around social media, there were some comments made by Jalen Johnson, I think other Bears teammates, or Bears players rather, in an interview talking about Caleb Williams, mentioning him, how they would bring him into a locker room. And they just mentioned, not bringing all that extra stuff with him that is reported and swirls around Caleb Williams, the Hollywood attitude, all that extra stuff that doesn't really revolve around football that has been attached to Caleb Williams' name. I'm not saying if it's true or not. It could be, it could not be. It could be very far from the truth. But that's always been a stigma or just attached to Caleb Williams' name. It could be off-putting sometimes to some of these other teams that have questions around it. And Jalen Johnson was just really mentioning that bringing all that into a locker room, everyone at the pro level will see right through that. And this is pretty significant based on those comments and how some of the players there got to know Caleb Williams at this dinner. The way Mark Silverman put it, it makes it seem like Caleb was the only one there to have that dinner exclusively with the Bears teammates, some of them. But later, Albert Breer of Bleacher Report tweeted out that the dinner was hosted longer and with more of a group sort of setting, which included Dallas Turner, the edge rusher from Alabama, Caleb Williams, and offensive tackle Tyler Guyton. And he went more into detail, saying that DJ Moore was there, Tyreek Stevenson were there, and those were really some of the main members of the Bears roster that was there. So it wasn't possibly so intimate with Caleb, having him just there with all the Bears teammates. But even if Turner was there and Guyton were there, like Breer says, it still says, I think it shows a lot for the Bears to do this. They've taken him out to 1,000 meals now at this point. But this one had more meaning, more significance to it, just because some Bears players currently have a chance to interact with Caleb Williams. And after those comments by Jalen Johnson, not really negative, but they're just out there. He put him out there. So people already see that and have questions around what he said and how that could maybe cause some friction. Now some Bears players, specifically DJ Moore, who could be catching passes from Caleb Williams, have a chance to really know him and see the kind of person that he is and really just know if he's focused all in on football. I'm sure they talked about that among other things, but that's something I thought that was very interesting and pretty cool that the Bears did, bringing in some players that were already on the team, because this draft pick is already pretty much sealed up. I think it would probably be one of the biggest surprises in draft history if they didn't take Caleb Williams at this point, based on everything that I've said, all the meetings that they have had, and the dinners and stuff like that. I actually didn't know this, that it's because it's so obvious now at this point that in the NFL rule book, in the rules that they have, the Bears could actually sign Caleb Williams right now if they wanted to, and if Caleb Williams wanted to, obviously. According to the NFL rules, there's a rule in there that permits the team with the first overall pick to sign its eventual first overall pick to a contract before the draft. Technically, they could do that, but nobody ever really does that or has ever done that, because the NFL wants to push the NFL draft, wants everybody watching it. And even if everybody knows what the first overall pick is going to be, imagine if they signed him already, he's on the Bears already, and then they drafted him. It's going to take away a lot of eyeballs and a lot of attention that is usually put on the NFL draft from the second it starts to the second the first round finishes. So it is a technicality that they could do, which I had no idea of before I started researching this topic, but it is pretty cool to see that, but it's definitely not going to happen. And now you look at this situation with the Bears. This visit appeared to be the last formality that needed to happen between the Bears and Caleb Williams. And in one part, it's significant because it's most likely going to be the only meeting that he takes, according to Ian Rappaport, but also because he didn't provide his medicals at all at any point so far in this offseason. Mentioned at the Combine that not everyone is going to get a chance to draft him, so not everybody should get his medical information. It makes sense. Some people didn't like it, some didn't have a problem with it. I didn't have a problem with it, but usually players provide all that stuff at the Combine. He didn't, and now in this official meeting, he provided that to the Bears. Nothing has been reported wrong with any of that information, so that's really the last checkbox that Caleb Williams had to really just cross off of his list, and same with the Bears. I think they've gotten to know him already pretty much as well as they can from the personal aspect of it. They know what he is as a player. They went to his pro day, and everybody was left impressed with what he showed at his pro day. It all seemed to go flawless, really no problems. And just before, now. If anything, it just solidifies them even more as the first overall pick. And now, if they haven't already, the Bears can start looking forward to how this could all play out. I'm sure on top of DJ Moore, Tyreek Stevenson, there was probably other players there that got a better look at Caleb Williams, getting to know him. That's always good. It's a good starting point, honestly. I haven't seen it personally done with other first-round picks because, quite frankly, I haven't seen one be so obvious as it is this year with Caleb Williams, at least just from monitoring it myself before in years past. Now it's so obvious that I think there's a good head start for the Bears to get going, have some players meet him now, makes the transition a lot easier, takes away the nerves a little bit if there was any with Caleb Williams in meeting some of these players. He got to know his way around the facility. Now all that's really left to do is for Roger Goodell to announce his name on April 25th at the first day of the NFL draft. So that's in a few weeks now. Very much anticipated, definitely from my standpoint, to see how it all plays out. Caleb is going to be the first pick, and the draft really starts after Caleb gets picked at this point. So a lot to look forward to in the draft. A lot more to come, I'm sure, with other picks and how everybody else moves, making these last 3 weeks agonizing, but also very exciting to see what goes down in the NFL. But in the meantime, we will move on from this segment. There's going to be a lot more to talk about on today's show. I mentioned Russell Wilson and the impressions he's already made on his Steelers teammates. That's coming up. More on Stefon Diggs and the Bills trade with the Texans, restructuring his contract a little bit heading into next season. And right after the break, I'm going to get into the whole situation with the Kansas City Chiefs and that failed vote that they had in Kansas City over the renovations to their stadium, what that could mean for their immediate future and their long-term future as well. So don't go anywhere. More to come on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the show to continue on with more segments. Now going into the whole situation with the Kansas City Chiefs and their failed vote in Kansas City around the renovation to Arrowhead, as well as a joint vote to renovate the Kansas City Royals Stadium as well. Both didn't pass because, like I mentioned a few days ago, there was that failed ballot measure to fund the renovations of Arrowhead and the Royal Stadium. That was all taking place, and more specifically, the idea around this vote, this decision that had to be made, was that it was going to reject or potentially accept the 3/8 of a cent sales tax on top of the sales tax that the people of Kansas City already pay. That was the proposal. And with those tax revenues and stuff like that, the Royals were planning a $300 million renovation of their stadium, and on that part, that was what they were going to do. And then the Chiefs had committed $300 million from their ownership and wanted to use their share of that tax revenue fund for an $800 million renovation of Arrowhead. The population vote was rejected. I think it was rejected. Over 58% of the votes rejected it. So that might not seem like a big deal right now, but it did, for now, start swirling around the idea of what happens if they can't renovate it there. What if the Chiefs, because this was rejected, might start to think about moving somewhere else? And already that idea seems way too far out there to be true. There's no way the Chiefs move, because obviously the narrative with the Chiefs, Arrowhead, one of the loudest stadiums, one of the best fan bases, it would create a big deal in the NFL with the Chiefs, I think, and the people of Kansas City, and probably the NFL as well, trying to move everything around, appeasing some of the fans, trying to move it to a location that's not too far, but also that kind of fits in with everything that the Chiefs want to do with a new stadium and renovating and everything like that. This whole topic got the mayor of Dallas, of all people, Eric Johnson, pretty interested in this topic. He tweeted out a few days ago when this ballot was announced. He tweeted, "Welcome home, Dallas Texans," with a smiley face, hashtag Cotton Bowl, alluding to the fact that if the Chiefs move to Dallas and that area, that's where they would play. After the failed vote, he tweeted that, and he went on the Dallas Morning News the next day to explain more about his tweet and what his feelings are around the whole situation. And he said on that interview, "Dallas was named the top sports city in the United States because we play to win. As I said previously, our market is big enough, growing enough, and loves football more than enough to support a second NFL team, especially a franchise with deep roots here." The Chiefs owner, Clark Hunt, also has the Dallas connections there. So apart from the Chiefs having those connections, their owner as well has connections and ties to Dallas. So that's an idea floating around there. It's important to remember that the Chiefs are bound to their lease that they signed in that location at Arrowhead right now, technically for a few more years now, 7 more years till 2031. So there's that. Breaking that leash, trying to break that, I guess it's another conversation, but really there's no immediate turnover for this whole situation, and it does seem improbable for it to happen, almost similarly to if you follow baseball and are in the loop of everything that's going on outside of just the games going on. You would know that the Oakland A's are another team that's in the process of potentially moving. I think they announced that they were moving officially in 2028 because they couldn't agree to extend their lease in Oakland with the stadium there and that location. So because of that, they're scheduled to move, probably, most likely, probably guaranteed, I should say, to Las Vegas. And now the Oakland Raiders have moved to Vegas, and now the Oakland A's as well will move to Las Vegas. And it's interesting, just some similarities between the two situations with the A's and the Chiefs now, how it kind of plays off of each other, the failed ballot, and as well as trying to negotiate an extended lease and seeing your lease not go through, how those situations sort of connect. And with the A's not extending their lease, that eventually ends up in them moving. Now the Chiefs, it's not anything to do with their lease. I'm sure if they wanted to renew their lease, they could do that to keep them there. They've done nothing but good for that city, and with them playing there, I'm sure that would be no issue. But this is a little bit different because of the failed vote among the people there. And if you thought a few years ago that the Oakland A's have been there for the longest of time since anybody can remember in Oakland, and the Chiefs as well in Kansas City, if you said that either of them had a chance of moving, the percentage you would give of them moving elsewhere would probably be less than 30-20% of you thinking that they would actually move. But things like this happen, unpredictable situations like this, and now you have the A's moving, and because you never thought the Oakland A's could be moving, it opens up the door a little bit more for anybody to start believing that, hey, the Chiefs could end up moving in the long haul if something isn't really figured out. If they can't get these renovations done like they want, they could just look to move and have another stadium elsewhere in a different city. But then again, you have to think about all the other stuff related to football and not so much the business side of everything. The fans there, I'm sure, would create a big uproar and a big scene about their team moving, especially because we're talking about the Chiefs. We're not just talking about any other NFL team, really. How successful they've been just recently, how much joy they brought to the city, the parades, the joy and everything, how connected they are to that city. It would create a big issue, but it usually just ends up being the business side of things take precedent, and it's not anything imminent, I want to stress again. It's just an idea floating around there, and it's something to think about now because, again, people didn't think nothing too much when the A's were not really getting anything done with their lease until recently, where they announced this isn't going anywhere, we're going to have to move. Right now, the Chiefs and Kansas City stand in that gray area right now. They could end up coming to amends and figuring out something, cooperating on something, but right now it's trending in the wrong direction. And you start thinking if they were to move, what could be a possible solution? If they can't stay in that specific area, what could happen? Well, the Kansas City Star reported that the former Kansas House Speaker, Ron Reichman Jr., is working with other parties to get the Chiefs to move from the Missouri side of Kansas City to the Kansas side. And Kansas Governor Lauren Kelly has also expressed her interest in that idea. The idea of St. Louis has also been floated around as well because obviously St. Louis had a team before. So moving the Chiefs there wouldn't be the worst thing. Thinking of other places where it could go, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't really think of an adequate spot to move such a team like the Chiefs and what it could mean for reinvigorating themselves there, getting the fans to come out there, really trying to find the perfect city to have that environment like they had at Arrowhead. Not to shine any negative light on Kansas City too much, but if you look at their sports teams, in reality, the Royals, the level of success that the Royals have compared to the Chiefs, it's night and day, in all honesty. So having the Chiefs there, it brings that whole city a different level of joy and just entertainment and things that they could do, feel connected with in terms of sports. If they were to move, that would be devastating for them. So trying to find that connection again with another place that has that similar affection for their team and really depends on their team to some extent to just bring them that level of joy. Finding that, I think, is critical. And just back on the Dallas thing, with the mayor, Eric Johnson, just imagine if the Cowboys and the Chiefs actually ended up in Dallas. That would be I don't know, that would probably be the craziest thing I've seen. Definitely in the NFL, but just in sports in general, to have those two teams, the magnitude of those two teams in one city, Dallas of all places, with their fan base and everything like that. How it would go, it would never happen. Again, I'm saying that the NFL probably wouldn't want that to happen. Jerry Jones wouldn't let that happen as long as he was the owner and the president of the Dallas Cowboys. But again, talking about moving places for the Chiefs and everything, I want to stress again that nothing is imminent. Nothing will likely happen for a few years. In all honesty, with the Chiefs, the A's announced that they were moving already, but that's not going to happen until 2028. They're not going to play in their stadium. I think they're going to play in a minor league stadium somewhere a little bit different from where they were located. But I don't think the Chiefs will do anything like that. If anything, they'll just watch it run at least close to their lease end date and then try and figure out something as they approach that. But for right now, it's floating around right now, that idea. Slight idea, not too likely idea that the Chiefs could end up moving. People might not think it's likely, but again, I'll point out, nobody thought the Oakland A's were going to be moving as much as people want to say that maybe they had to move because they weren't really generating anything in Oakland. There wasn't many fans going there. But in the end, nobody really thought they were ever going to move, and it ends up happening that they are moving, and people can't believe it at some extent. But the Chiefs, it would be a much larger scale and a large scale to have it actually happen and move this entire franchise and team somewhere else. It would create a lot of people being upset, a lot of mixed feelings about it. I'm sure the players will say something. The face of the league, Patrick Mahomes, I'm sure will say something. Travis Kelce, if it were to move. But right now, nothing's really being done as to really take action for it. But again, I would like to know what you guys think about this whole situation. Do you think the Chiefs could actually end up moving in the near future? Where would you guys like to see them go other than St. Louis or somewhere else like that? The other side, more towards Kansas than the Kansas City side of Missouri. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Where could they move? Where would you like to see them move? Leave it all in the comments or drop it in the tip and donations link to air it on this live show. I want to get your guys' feedback on that. That's where it stands right now. Nothing more coming out of it, just a thought that's floating around there with the Dallas mayor saying something like that. I thought it'd be interesting to really get into it more if people weren't really aware of it. But saying that, we will move on from that and leave it there. It will develop, I'm sure, soon, if not in a few years, like I mentioned. But as we move on with the show, we're going to go to the second break. And on the other side, I'm going to talk about Russell Wilson and how Cam Hayward, Pat Freiermuth have commented on Russell Wilson, on his early impressions with them and the team and how they view him going forward and how he could help their team, as well as talking more about Stefon Diggs and all the details around him now being a Houston Texan, at least for one more year, this year, 2024, not so much guaranteed in 2025. All those stories coming up after this break. Don't go anywhere. All those are coming up next.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Moving along with the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, talking now about Russell Wilson, another topic that was very popular at the start of me doing this show, and then it kind of died off. Of course, we got the groundbreaking news that he signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but that seems like such a long time ago. It was almost like an exact month from now, I think maybe a little bit over, that he signed officially with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And since then, they also brought in a few more pieces, Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Patrick Queen, among others, just to add on to the depth of this roster. I've been very satisfied. Justin Fields is another one, of course. I've been very satisfied and surprised, like I've mentioned on this show, about all the activity that the Steelers have shown, especially with the trades, the biggest trade being Justin Fields and bringing him in. I thought after signing Russell Wilson that, that was pretty much it. They were going to try and re-sign Mason Rudolph and maybe go that route, the more typical, traditional Steelers route that they usually go, the anticipated route. But again, they took a hard left turn, traded for Justin Fields, and brought in 2 new quarterbacks to revamp the entire quarterback room. I was surprised, but also pleasantly surprised because of this. Seeing them make all these moves, I think it was needed. They needed to clear out some of the players and really make a change because They haven't won a playoff game. That's the biggest thing. TJ Watt's commented on it. Everyone talks about it. Their president talks about it. Omar Khan, their general manager, Mike Tomlin. Winning a playoff game, not even winning the Super Bowl or getting to the conference championship, just winning a playoff game. They haven't done that in about 7 to 8 years now. They have to get back to that. Quite frankly, making the playoffs is starting to become just not enough for the Steelers at this point, and trying to still continue that franchise and that legacy of championship culture that you want to say. If you want to continue that on, you have to win a playoff game and get pretty far in the playoffs. But Russ was signed, like I mentioned a month ago, sticking to him now specifically, and he had that press conference, one of the more positive and just very eager, it seemed, for him to be there. He was very happy to be there. If anyone saw the clips of him from his press conference, how excited he was to be there, how many good things he had to say about the organization. Then he goes on and you see all the training videos on social media, if that pops up on your feed, him working out and stuff like that, on the field, throwing in some drills that he does just in the offseason, regular offseason stuff, right? And then recently you have Pat Freiermuth, the third-year tight end for the Pittsburgh Steelers, go on an interview on a show, and they asked him about his relationship with Russell Wilson, if he's made any contact with him, if he has any first impressions of him, if he has reached out to him. And in that interview, he said, "I was just down there in San Diego with him, working out and throwing routes. He's been great at talking to guys and starting to build that connection. He's a great guy. You can tell the drive and determination that he has to win and come to Pittsburgh and win some playoff games for us." He referencing the throwing session, the practice, I guess you could say, with Van Jefferson. Calvin Austin was there, along with Pat Freiermuth, with Russell Wilson. And that's good to see. Russell Wilson already making a connection there, because a lot is being put into the situation with Russell Wilson and going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. New quarterback room, like I mentioned, switching up this idea of trying to change something. It was a pretty big move, in all honesty, for the Steelers just to move on from Kenny Pickett as they did. Technically, they moved on from him. If you saw the reports, he wanted to leave. He asked for a trade. How that all broke down, you wouldn't really know exactly what it is unless you were there. Both sides of the story have their quirks to it and some changes to it, their own personal spin on it. But it didn't work out. And moving on from Kenny Pickett, because he was a first-round pick, is a pretty big deal. Bringing in Russell Wilson because of the baggage he comes with in Denver, the success that he had in Seattle, now bringing him into the Steelers on a one-year deal, it's a very low-risk deal for the Steelers, which is good, but at the same time, you still have this great team that you want to take advantage of as long as you can, and them having so much confidence in bringing in Russell Wilson to be that guy, be their quarterback, as well as Justin Fields. But for right now, the initial thought is that Russell Wilson will be the starter, at least through training camp, preseason, however long into the regular season. He's in the pole position, as Mike Tomlin would say, to be the starting guy. And Mike Tomlin and Cam Hayward, another teammate of his now, were reported to be big advocates for Russell Wilson and bringing him in, and just having that established veteran guy in there to really lead this young offense. Probably the youngest part of their team is their skill positions and the guys that have to put up the points. Obviously, that's important, and they need, evidently, a leader to kind of calm things down, ride the ship a little bit, and just show these guys how things are done, when things aren't going great, when things are going good, how to improve and stuff like that. Cam Hayward appeared on the Rich Eisen show recently, and he also chimed in on Russell Wilson and what he saw out of him and why he thought he could be a good fit in Pittsburgh. And on the Rich Eisen show, he said, "I think he's a hungry guy who's ready to prove a lot of people wrong. I think on the opposite side of the ball, we have so many great weapons. Some of them are younger, so having a more established guy who has been through it is going to benefit the group." He also referenced Russell Wilson this past year. a lot of people won't acknowledge it or won't really point out to the fact that he was actually a pretty decent quarterback in terms of stats and the production that he put up with the Denver Broncos. A lot more impressive than he did in his first season. That first season, everybody wants to forget about, especially Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett, how it all turned out. And it was just all a big mess that first year with the renovation, giving him a big contract and stuff like that. It was never going to work out. From the first couple weeks, you kind of knew where that was going. Then in the second year, Sean Payton comes in. There's a bit more order with everything, even though it broke down towards the end. Sean Payton and Russell Wilson butted heads over his contract and sitting him on purpose for him to not get an additional bonus, stuff like that. That all happened. Obviously, you'd want to forget about that. But in terms of just playing, in some of the games that he did play, Cam Hayward mentioned that a lot of people weren't able to beat the Chiefs. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl last year, and Russell Wilson, he referenced that game when the Broncos beat the Chiefs 24-9, I believe the score was, and Russell Wilson playing a big role in that. He threw for 114 yards, 3 touchdowns in that game. And again, Cam just mentioned that being able to win big games against top elite competition is important, something that the Steelers really haven't done. Just looking at the playoffs, the best competition, the best talent left at that point of the season, they haven't been able to get over that hump. Russell Wilson has in the past, not just this last year with that Kansas City game, obviously in Seattle, winning Super Bowls, winning a bunch of playoff games with a great defense, comparable to what the Steelers have. Probably not so much in terms of impact so far, because the defense that Russell Wilson had, the Legion of Boom, how historical they were. This Pittsburgh Steelers defense is good, but they haven't achieved anything. So it is a good defense in both scenarios, but again, way different in Seattle, way better situation there for him. He was in the prime of his career there. Obviously has deteriorated a little bit now in his older years, but I think he could still bring something to this Steelers team. And apparently all of his teammates see the same thing in him, that same drive and same sort of contribution that he can bring that unfortunately Kenny Pickett never really got the chance to. Because he struggled with injuries, some of his own fault and some of the Steelers, again, equal fault not to support him with the right amount of weapons or get him the right offensive coordinator, switching offensive coordinators halfway through the season, keeping Matt Canada. Was that the right choice for Kenny Pickett, or was he supposed to get somebody else better after that first season? All of those moving parts was never going to work out for Kenny Pickett, and on top of him, people already having questions around him. All of those variables that the Steelers provided him was never really going to work out. But in saying that, they were close to making the playoffs with him that first year. Then this past year, they made the playoffs, but he wasn't even part of it. And just looking at the comparison with Russell Wilson and Kenny Pickett, some people have questions over how much better it can get. Russell Wilson finished the year last year, the regular season, as the 8th best quarterback in the NFL in terms of passer rating at a 98. Comparing that with Kenny Pickett, again, not awful. They made the playoffs. They were 10-7, but his passer rating was 27th in the NFL at an 81. Then you look at the yards and all the other stuff like that. Russell Wilson threw for over 3,070 yards specifically. Kenny Pickett threw for 2,070. Pretty weird how it was exactly 1,000 more. The difference there between Wilson and Pickett. Then touchdowns really is the biggest thing, because the Steelers, I think they averaged 18, no more than 19 points a game. Probably 18 or 17 points a game, and their defense was giving up less than 18 to 19 points. So all these games were always right down to the wire, and it was always those last drives, the critical points in the second half where the defense is tired, the offense can't get anything going. Then it all just turns badly for the Steelers. Trust me, I've seen a bunch of those games. Being a fan, I've seen it all just go downhill and just blow up in their face because their offense can't get anything going. They couldn't score touchdowns. The biggest thing in these games that make the difference, obviously. Russell Wilson threw for 26 of those touchdowns, 8 interceptions. And Kenny Pickett threw for 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. A lot of difference there. And Russell Wilson was sacked 45 times just last year. Kenny Pickett only 23 times. And then completion percentage, 66 and 62 for Kenny Pickett, 66 for Russell Wilson. You can look at the dynamics of the teams, Denver and Pittsburgh. You can't really compare them. But I think that is just another point to point out for Russell Wilson and what he can bring. I think some people would agree that he was doing a lot more in trying to win these games with a lot less talent. Just comparing the two teams, there's definitely more talent on the Steelers. The Steelers can provide more weapons, a better defense, a better coach, more successful coach recently. All those variables, adding that to what Russell Wilson did in the situation in Denver, a little bit less talent on the offensive side, a worse defense, the dynamic with the coach was never going to play in his favor. All that is now flipped. You have a good relationship with Mike Tomlin, a better defense, the same level of talent on offense or better, a better offensive line, just looking at the numbers of sacks that Wilson took with Kenny Pickett. All that's in his favor now, and he already played very well last season to bounce back from his first year in Denver. It's hard to envision him just dropping off with all those variables now being better or a lot better than he had in Denver. But again, talk is cheap. Really, in all honesty, seeing it all just play out, projecting everything, he's going to have to prove it. I think there's a good chance for him to revive his career to some extent. He is in the latter part of that plan in his career. You still have Justin Fields there. People think Justin Fields will start sooner rather than later. I'm going to have to see it just for all the reasons I just mentioned with the variables that Wilson and Fields both now have at their advantage. I think it's going to be hard for them to lose this job. They're going to definitely lose this job rather than Mike Tomlin and the Steelers taking away the job from Russell Wilson. He's going to have to play really bad for him to be benched for Justin Fields and them getting a look at Justin Fields. That's where that kind of all stands right now. The Steelers seem, some of their teammates, Russell Wilson's new teammates now seem to really like him, see that fit that he could bring to this team. I mentioned a veteran leader to lead this offense. They have most of their veterans on their defense, so adding that voice on the offensive side of the ball, I think could help them significantly. Are they a playoff team right now? It's hard to say. I talked about it a few weeks ago. They're set at 7.5 wins, which is crazy disrespect to the Steelers. They're set at 7.5 wins. With Russell Wilson, they're definitely going to hit that. You can't convince me otherwise, really. So that's where they stand. It's looking, in my estimation, a lot better for them than last year at this point in the offseason. We're going to have to see how it all plays out. But in the meantime, we'll leave that there, and we're going to go to the last break of the show. On the other side of this quick stoppage, we're going to talk about Stefon Diggs and his contract, break down a little bit more with the Houston Texans and his outlook for 2025. More on that coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the show for the last segment of today's episode, we're going to talk about more on Stefon Diggs and what his contract is looking like right now. It was sort of developing later on after Wednesday when it all broke down and people figuring out why he was traded, for what he was traded. The Texans actually restructured his deal a little bit. He was scheduled to start his new 4-year deal with the Buffalo Bills, obviously before he was traded. Now with the Texans, that 4-year, $70 million deal, I think it was, that total amount. But now, after the trade, the Texans restructured that deal and actually voided the final 3 years of that new contract that they gave him. And that $22.5 million is going to be guaranteed to Stefon Diggs in his first year, 2024, this year coming up. And it will give him the opportunity to be a free agent in 2025. So a lot it can be taken from that, restructuring his deal. Really a prove-it year to expiring deal to more motivated Stefon Diggs is a way that you can put this transaction being done, voiding those final 3 years. Before, I've mentioned on this topic that, you have to think big picture, long-term with this team. A lot of players on the Texans are younger than Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs is now 30. Still a very good receiver. I think he's going to do very well in Houston and going to do a lot for them, like I've talked about on previous episodes. But to have him there for 4 more years at the amount of money he's making, this deal seems like the right decision for a few reasons. The positives of this, you can get a more motivated Stefon Diggs, a prove-it year, like I mentioned, having that 1 year. If he doesn't work out with Houston, if he balls out and goes crazy, like I still believe he can, the capability of having that in him, I still think he does. And doing that, he goes off this year. They make it to the AFC Championship this time, maybe win it, go to the Super Bowl, make the playoffs at least, and he does well. If he doesn't decide to go back with the Texans, or the Texans decide they also don't want to sign him, he has a good little resume just from that year that he can provide to other teams and maybe still get a pretty significant contract, 2-year, 3-year deal, something like that, from another team that saw him perform still at 31 years old, at 30 years old, and he could have that incentive to go out there more motivated than ever. If he does go bad, he could just leave in 2025, more so on the side of the Texans, more of a positive for them. If it doesn't work out, they have no strings attached to him. They can let him go, and they don't really lose too much with bringing him in right now. They could definitely only do more good than bad at this point for the Texans. And also, just combining those two scenarios, if Diggs balls out, they do very well. Why couldn't he stay on the Houston Texans? That's also still an option. Restructure his deal again, or give him a new deal, I should say. A 2-year, 3-year sort of thing that keeps him in Houston if they really like him, if he has great chemistry with CJ Stroud, has a good relationship in the locker room. It's all positive with him. He produces. I can't see why they can't work out another deal. Cheaper, probably, the Texans would want to go, but that's also still an option as a positive. On the negative side of things, how much can Houston really get out of him in this short 1-year deal, trying to adapt to his new scenarios, adapt to CJ Stroud and how different he throws the ball than Josh Allen, the timing of it all, how well and how flawlessly can you execute those things in just 1 year. It definitely won't get to the relationship that he had with Allen, but I think it could go well enough because he isn't the only receiver there. Nico Collins, Tank Dell are there. Stefon Diggs can take a little bit longer and not have to be relied upon so much. But that is a question right now. How much can you really get out of him in 1 year to the fullest extent? Also, we've seen the outbursts. We've seen him have some issues on the sideline in the locker room and stuff like that with Allen, the pent-up frustration. Could those problems carry over? Some people will have those questions. I don't think so much. I think it just had to do with the situation, specifically in Buffalo, how good they could have been, but it always just seemed like something was holding them back or they weren't really playing to the level they were capable of. I think Stefon Diggs is just frustrated from that point, only on that specific thing. Not so much to do with the kind of people that are there, the kind of relationship he had with them. I'm sure he had a great relationship with all of them, but it just boiled over with the frustration. Those are sort of the negative things that could work out. But in seeing that they restructured his deal, I thought, what teams could be out there that could fit him in 2025 if he doesn't re-sign with the Texans? I decided on 3 teams that make the most sense to me and the most sense to Diggs and how he would like to most likely finish off his career. I have 3 teams here. The first one, in my opinion, tied for the most likely situation, the best situation, could be the San Francisco 49ers. They have the issues going right now with Brandon Ayuk. His contract, are they going to extend him? Are they going to be able to afford him with the extension that he wants? The relationship seems a little bit bumpy right now between John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, and Ayuk. Him going on social media, tweeting at Mike Tomlin, responding to something John Lynch said on his Instagram story. It doesn't seem close right now, according to multiple reports. So that's an issue. If he leaves, they're going to need a wide receiver. They're going to need more weapons for Brock Purdy, especially if, like I mentioned before on this show, they want to extend Purdy, give him a lot of money. If you're going to commit a lot of money to him, you have to make sure he can produce. Supporting him with the sort of level of supporting cast that he has been used to will only benefit them in trying to keep this run of NFC Championship games, playoff appearances going as long as possible, as long as Brock Purdy is there. You want to be able to support him as much as you can. Losing Ayuk and not doing anything about it will definitely harm this team. So looking at a Stefon Diggs maybe in 2025 on a short-term deal, 1-year deal again, 2-year deal maybe for them if they can afford it. Obviously, they had some salary cap issues this year. So that all has to be thought over and discussed. But I don't think it's the worst idea if you lose Brandon Ayuk. Especially, I think it could come sooner rather than later because of what I mentioned before. If you're going to lose him anyway and not extend him, he has 1 more year left on his deal. You don't want to lose him for nothing next year. If you do trade him, I think the draft would be the best option to do that. And by doing that, I think 2025 will open up this door a little bit more for the Niners to try and find another weapon if they lose Ayuk this year and realize that they're in dire need of another weapon. Then the second team that I think fits him the best probably would be the Baltimore Ravens. Stefon Diggs is from Maryland. Baltimore has always needed a wide receiver, and I know they would love to have a young, up-and-coming receiver that they develop, draft, and he becomes one of the best receivers in the league. Zay Flowers could become that. He's the closest thing that they've had to that. They always just seem to sign players, or they do draft receivers, but they don't really work out as they hope. Zay Flowers is looking like the most promising one, but they would obviously love to add to that offense to complement Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, already an exciting duo. Mark Andrews there as well. Isaiah Likely kind of had a breakout season there towards the end. All exciting things, but just imagine if you had another receiver on top of Zay Flowers to really complete this offense. It would make them almost virtually impossible to stop. Diggs, again, I keep saying he is older, so if you want to say this could be more of an Odell situation when he signs there, being an older player, how much can he give you? I can understand that, but then again, I think Diggs at 31 years old, 32 years old, I think he could give them more production than what they've had in previous seasons. He'll provide that sort of mentor role for Zay Flowers as well. Another veteran in that locker room to really drive this team because he's more motivated than ever, it seems like, with how frustrated he gets on the sidelines and how bad he's been, or how bad he wants to get to a Super Bowl and how close he's been in multiple instances with the Buffalo Bills. Adding him to the Ravens, that always just seemed to be right there, I think could get both of them over that hump, competing for a Super Bowl. So that makes the second most sense to me in that aspect. And lastly, another team that I just wanted to throw in there to complete this, it still makes sense, is the Washington Commanders, close to home for Stefon Diggs in Maryland. They've addressed almost everything this offseason, really, on the defensive side, some pieces for the offensive line. What else I was going to say? Defense, and obviously Dan Quinn comes in, bringing in a new general manager, new offensive coordinator with Cliff Kingsbury, adding a lot of pieces. Running back, Austin Eckler's also there now. They've almost addressed everything except pass rusher and quarterback they're going to address, you want to assume, this year in the draft. And now you just need another guy to finally be that 1-2 punch with Terry McLaurin. You have Jahan Dotson there. They just lost Curtis Samuel. But even with Curtis Samuel there, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin was still very good, still very productive with everything, all the missing pieces, the lack of talent, if you want to say, on the Commanders. He still performs very well. Now, I definitely think they've gotten better all over in general with that roster. I have confidence in Dan Quinn to produce again as a head coach. Say they draft an exciting young quarterback, a Jaden Daniels, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, whoever they think is best to lead their organization. Having that young quarterback there, if he performs very well, just gives more of an incentive for Stefon Diggs to look at that situation and not think so badly of it. You know, people might think going to Commanders, you want to compete for Super Bowls. If you're Stefon Diggs, what are you doing going to the Commanders? I'm pretty high on the Commanders to be better than they have been in recent years. I think they're just levels above now with Dan Quinn there, like I mentioned, and good leader. Coming from a good situation in Dallas where he had a ton of success, I think that is a whole recipe for them to definitely improve on what they have been doing. Regardless if they get Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or J.J. McCarthy, again, I think it's better than what they've had in previous years. So all of that just makes sense for Stefon Diggs to go there and be the immediate leader on that young offense, because it's going to be young either way, with Terry McLaurin to help build and mold out that offense to be very competitive in an NFC East where I definitely have questions around the Cowboys. The Eagles have addressed their offense. They're a juggernaut on offense, but defense, there's still some holes. The Giants are the Giants. So the Commanders are in a good spot right now where you don't really know what to expect of them. There's no real expectations right now. They can play with house money and really surprise a lot of people and build up these good vibes going into the next year under Dan Quinn, get him more confidence from the fans and the organization to provide him with more help. With Stefon Diggs there, I think he could add a lot to that. And I think that offense would really become pretty as close to whole as they've ever had with Diggs there, Terry McLaurin, a good quarterback. If they produce this year, it's going to just add on more to that. And those are the three teams I think best fit is for Diggs. But on the other hand, just to wrap up this whole segment, those are hypothetical options if he doesn't sign with Houston. If you're Stefon Diggs, are you going to find a better situation with Houston? You know, that thought has to come into his head at some point, I would think. If something feels off about Houston after this year, you get close, you don't make it to the Super Bowl or where you think you're going to land, are you really going to go out and look for another team that you think gives you a better chance? I find it hard to think of another team that's young, talented, and exciting, good coach, good front office, to try your luck somewhere else. That has to be a question that he really has to think about. Even if he doesn't produce well in Houston, I still think I would definitely try and renegotiate an extension for sure with Houston after this year. But again, that's a two-way street. The Texans are going to have to want him back. Going back to that point I made before, a more motivated Diggs. If he produces, if he wants to stay in Houston, he'll have to produce to have them want to keep him around. And just the last thing on this topic with them, it's going to depend a lot on how early you see that chemistry with C.J. Stroud and this team. He can be that leader, like I mentioned. He could add that flair and nastiness and just want to win games that you see a lot of teams in their second year, young teams, kind of struggle with. I don't think he'll let that happen. I'm very confident that this Houston Texans team can be up there competing for the best team in the AFC. Are they the best team in the AFC right now? In terms of talent, I'll say they're probably as talented as any team in the AFC. The best team in the AFC, you have to factor in other things there, experience, coaching, and stuff like that. That all we're going to have to see play out during the season. But It's going to be a very exciting season with all the moves that are just going on. I've mentioned this is one of the craziest off seasons I've seen. I'm all for it. I hope more things like this happen. And this is just the latest blockbuster thing to happen in the NFL. Just wait till the NFL draft comes around, because something always happens at the draft to shake things up. But in saying that, that'll do it for me today on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone listening or watching as well. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow the network on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that are posted daily on there, full live shows that are recorded and published on there as well, or individual segment videos if you want to rewatch a certain segment, or if you missed a segment that you want to rewatch or go catch up on. They're all on the channels, both channels as well. Tune in every weekday as usual at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL discussions, conversations, and a wide variety of topics with me, your host, Manny Maradiaga. Wishing you guys all an awesome weekend. I'll see you guys all on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.